what's going on, everybody? And thank you for joining me on another episode of The Art and the Artist. I am here with Zach Baker. We are inside of the Reisig and Taylor Gallery in Los Angeles, where Zach here is the curator, he's an artist, he's a writer, he's lots of things that we'll find out more about right now. All right, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm glad to be here.
All right, so I want to start, I guess, really from the beginning, right? Were you always artistic growing up? Were you creating as a child, or was it something that kind of grew on you as you got older?
Yeah, I mean, like most, little kids, I guess, sure. I was always creative. But I mean, I was always pretty seriously into just like, structures and like building, weird things. So I grew up in the woods. So a lot of my creativity was just sort of, engineered around being outside and just, sort of.
So where are you originally from?
I'm from Massachusetts.
Oh, okay.
A small town.
Okay.
So yeah, that's.
All right.
That's where I grew up.
Were you the only artist in your family, or was
my mother is really artistic. Like she used to always, like every day on our lunch bags, she'd draw like a different cartoon. Like she always wanted to sort of be like someone who made like comics for a newspaper and stuff. But her mom didn't support the art school idea, that kind of generation. And, she went to nursing school instead, but she was always really creative. So like, she was always taking us to art classes, making sure we saw art. But a lot of my exposure to art and that environment, I, grew up in a really religious household. So we always saw a lot of religious art.
Yes.
So that was like a big, inspiration to me. Like the first real art I saw that wasn't just me messing around was always in like churches. And then started going to museums and stuff.
Sure.
There's no one else is really creative. My dad is definitely not creative. My father is not a creative type. Doesn't know what I do at all. So. I don't think I've told him yet.
Oh, really? You think you're out here gallivanting around Los Angeles? So,
No. So.
Awesome. You know what? I can relate to that. I went to Catholic school, so every Friday, or during Lent Friday, we go to church. Once a month we have Mass in the morning, and the art that's everywhere. Just the statues and all these Catholic, specifically Catholic paintings, and a lot of famous ones. So it's religion. I would say. Well, my dad was an artist, so I kind of grew up around it. But that religious aspect. I mean, I don't know what religion, specifically, but Catholics in general, there's just a ton of Renaissance, Catholic religious art. So that's pretty awesome.
And it's all very intense too, especially as a kid. Staring at a bloody man.
Yeah. You know what?
Intense scenes of mourning. Like mother and child. So, but that at least gave me sort of a range of like what visual expression looks like, all the way from like silly crafts that you do in Sunday school, to like the actual stuff I was surrounded by. And like I said, like my mom wasn't like an artist per se. She just like saw herself as something kind of silly, but like there was always that creativeness of like even just finding it in those everyday things. Like I'm gonna write something, make something cool on your lunch bag.
Okay. All right. So then, how would you say the environment that you grew up in Massachusetts had an impact on the way that you create now?
Well, I mean, everything is really influenced by sort of like what's nearby but unseen, which is just for me comes from always being in the woods.
Sure.
Like all these sounds, and like really grew up in like mostly isolation. I had like neighborhood friends, but there weren't a lot of people around. So like the presence of like figures and stuff in our work is usually for both of us, like my partner who grew up in a really populated space like LA, and I grew up in a really isolated space, so we have this sort of like tension that we really explore just in terms of like the presence of bodies, of figures, of what's there, what's not there. But there's always something there. There's always someone there. There's always someone listening, and that's sort of what's important to me. And but also, there's a beauty to these like dark places, like the woods at night, or these things that seem like a little colorless or dark, like a wintry scene, on like I grew up on a lake too, so just like sheets of ice and like openness and that kind of space is always but more than anything, it's just a matter of like I'm sure that space influences me in all sorts of ways that I'm not sure about too.
That's true.
We just grew up
subconsciously.
Exactly. So I'm sure it filters in all sorts of ways I'm blind to. But I just was fascinated by the way that I could like look at a space around me and not only sort of represent it, make like a landscape painting, but like, really see what's there in a totally different way. I've always been way more focused on what's not seen, like what's not represented, and how that can be actually represented and shown. So
that makes so much sense after, just going through your art, like everything you're saying right now. Oh my God, it makes absolute perfect sense. Because one of the things that I noticed, okay, well, first let me talk about, was it Objet AD?
Yeah, Objet AD.
So that's you?
Or Objet AD, we have whichever way.
Okay. So that is the collaboration.
Yeah, and that name actually that was something that I was on a drawer in my grandfather's workshop that I liked when I was a kid. It was just sort of a space filled with like weird objects. And he was illiterate, like he labeled everything in his own. He was French, and so everything was just weird. Like he stopped school in like 6th grade. It's like a kid. Like he had to work and stuff. Like grew up really poor, but he just like but he was a brilliant carpenter. And he was a contractor, so he did all that without any sort of formal education. But everything, like all the labels, were just his own sort of messed up lingo for stuff. And so that was just one of those things, and it was just one of those places as a kid I just like have like a strong memory of, and then it also sort of became a dream sort of like symbol for me. It would often like come up as sort of just like something in dreams. And so me moving to California in a lot of ways was also in being with my partner who I loved was like that I had a dream where that was like I was getting a tattoo from her of that. So it has this like this weird sort of like significance and just sort of random. That's why I would say it's just sort of like a placeholder. Like it could mean everything, but it also means nothing. It's just sort of it's just a name, it's just a container, and it's just something that's connected to memory for me, and then for us just connected to sort of this dream, and my partner loved the idea of this sort of unconscious connection. That we found.
Incredible. That's a great story. Okay. So from a label and a drawer in your grandpa's workshop, you get the name of this collaboration. Now, what made you guys decide to, put your minds together and work on, art together? Because I think I know one other art couple that I've ever that I've met personally. So what was the idea behind it?
Well, I mean, I was prior to really like being with her and focusing on art together, I'd always been making work individually, but I kept almost none of it.
Okay. Wow.
So first of all, I had very little. I was at that time I'd been writing. I mean, I still write, but I was focused on. I was in a PhD program. I was doing stuff like that. So art was a more interstitial practice for me, and even in my undergraduate where I did studio art practice, I actually started in earth art. So that's so you can see this connection back to the woods. I was always interested in sort of the impermanence of work, which became a problem when it came to actually keep things and put things on paper. It's like it's impermanent, so it's just gone in the wind, or it was just part of a process for me, and I was always interested in that. So it really took me kind of working with someone else, or someone else appreciating what I was doing before I took it seriously in that way. I always took it seriously as a practice, but for me it was always linked in sort of with my academic work, which I'd been focused on at that time. And then I started having health issues while doing my PhD. I have epilepsy, and just I did 2 masters, which was plenty. And then as I was in, I had like a fellowship and working for that, but it just wasn't the space of teaching and needing like the certain. It was just hard to do because my body was unpredictable. So if I had seizures, first I'm going to scare the kids. My students are going to be like, what's happening? But other than that, it just was like a problem, and I just like really encountered like the economic problems of like what that was going to do. And I was like, well, what's a weird thing that I can do that I won't have to be in such a structured thing? Art. So I started to pursue that more.
So what was the original goal, though, if you don't mind me asking? What was so you weren't planning on being a full-time artist?
No, I just wanted to teach. So I've always I love, and that was, but to me, teaching and art are very hand in hand in a way, because what I realized too is I was writing these essays, it's all great, but who on earth is going to read any of this? I mean, if I'm being honest with myself, I think there's a lot of power in that. I love all that. It's all respect to that, but who am I engaging? Who's going to read this? I want to make something that like my sisters might see. That, like someone that. So I want to read something that anyone and I want to make something that anyone from any walk of life can still encounter, and it will be totally different for each person, but will still be encountered in a public place, more so than like an academic journal or stuff. So I wanted to teach, and then I realized I wasn't gonna, just because of what was going on with my health, that wasn't really gonna be something I could secure, because I can't make the promise of like, if I'm gonna be off and on, like some days I just can't show up. That's not fair to me. So, but yeah, I always wanted to teach. I want to be able to engage others in a way that's not directly about me, just like I love the in-betweens of anything, of writing, of a work of art.
So what were you teaching?
So like comparative literature, philosophy, art history. So my focus was in art, like non-Western art history. So specifically, I was looking at like East Asian art history, African art history. So, but in response to sort of Western traditions, like looking at how colonialism carves out a particular image of the world, and how we have these other sort of globalisms, all these different layers that are overlooked because of the over sort of determination of a tradition. And so what I learned and what I taught was sort of like non-traditions, but also bringing that back to how that relates to how, traditions pick those things up and take them elsewhere, just like with like Cubism and African art and influences of all these things that are not regarded as high arts, but that come to be incorporated. So I really like to look at that sort of like siphoning off of cultures and sort of recuperate those moments and see, because those are important teaching moments for anyone from anywhere. So that's what I always focus on. So I was in comparative literature, I was studying Japanese, Swahili, Spanish, I was teaching Latin American literature, and East African literature, which is interesting, and then so I just sort of try to fill in the cracks of who I'm not too, because I'm always already speaking from myself and where I'm coming from. So that's why I intentionally went out there and tried to sort of cover parts of the globe.
That's awesome.
My base,
that's fantastic, because I mean, if we're talking about, just the art that you learn in school, not even college, just the little you learn in like grade school, high school, it's all the same sort of stuff. Or just the artists that people know. I wouldn't say around the world, but maybe here in America. It's, I would say it's limited to a very few. It's either Europe or it's an American artist. But there's so many different countries with just generations and generations of doing art in a particular style, and maybe that changing into something else. That's awesome.
I'm just all about finding anything that falls through the cracks for what I consider like silly reasons, which I consider like language barriers and stuff like that to be ultimately kind of silly reasons. So if I can personally overcome that and just find ways that people can come into contact in new ways, which is sort of what a gallery does too, in art in general, I think, then something powerful is happening. It might not even be good all the time, but at least it's powerful. That kind of encounter, between places that aren't usually in contact is important in a world full of blind spots.
100%. And that's sort of one of the big inspirations for making the show was, I do feel like actually now this young generation of artists, like a lot of the younger people, when I say young, I mean younger than I.
Sure.
So they're really resilient, right? They're very good at getting themselves out there, and I just want the art to be seen. I want more art, because when people think of art, usually it's like the classic stuff, right? It's hundreds of years old. But there's so many fantastic modern artists, even from like 20, 30 years ago up until today, and so it's a beautiful thing to spread out into the world.
There's plenty of more and more the artwork is defined by the work itself, which is good. That if someone puts in the work over a lifetime, that they've basically written something with their body, they've shown something, and that can be read if someone works hard enough, if someone takes their work seriously. And that's always artists that I'm attracted to, the kind of work I'm attracted to, where it's not really about even building something beautiful or to be liked, but it's telling a story, or maybe it's not, but it's doing something, and it's working, and it's just work. Because at a certain point, that's really what it is. It's a form of work, and it's a really sort of strange form of work compared to other forms of labor that we've come to regulate.
Absolutely.
But that's the power of art, that it's still a form of work in a sense. It's not a direct exchange, but it still has the power of work in terms of being something transformative, taking everyday materials or things that are just raw to some extent and transforming them and using that to communicate with others. So to me, that's where the language comes in. That's where all those points about connection and disconnection come in. It's all sort of doing the same thing, asking similar questions about, how do we come into contact with something? How do we change something? What is it to change something? And what is it to just encounter anything in the everyday world? And how does art maybe disrupt that?
Absolutely. That's fantastic. So so I sort of see artists as, I guess you could kind of label them entertainers, right?
Sure.
They provide entertainment for the world. Do you think that artists get, I'd say, like the credit or the respect they deserve as opposed to other forms of entertainment and those entertainers?
That's a good question. I mean, I'd say the artists that are good entertainers usually do, which is the trick of it. I mean, I'm like sort of usually on the opposite end of the spectrum of that. I want to be obviously even not using my name or our name on our art as a way of sort of like negating the identity part of it, because that's basically that kind of question for me is all about identity. It's all about like someone who can play their identity really well in a world that's super obsessed with people's identities right now because of social media or anything. Just this idea that someone's identity becomes a kind of currency, between followers and watching them rack it up. It's really a kind of currency. It's all exchange. And if I like this person's stuff, then I'll get more. So it's all it's all kind of money in a way. It's playing the role of money.
100%.
So identity is a currency, and I get it, and for good or for bad, like anything. It's a double-edged sword. So I think there are artists that are definitely really good at getting, like, leveraging that in a good way. Some that do it in a bad way, but I mean, it doesn't really matter. Any publicity is good publicity, which you see. So even with like works of art that aren't that popular or like do something negative politically these days, those artists like they're still out there though. So it's still always this question of what even is entertainment too. It's like just being out there is a form of entertainment, which we have seen sort of how politics have evolved over the last
talk about entertainment.
So that's always what is entertainment? Because sometimes I'm entertained and I know I shouldn't be. So I always watch out for that.
Oh, that's funny. Yeah, that's the absolute truth. Okay. All right, awesome. Okay. All right, I forgot what I was talking about. All right, I want to get back into the collaborations. Okay. Was there any sort of compromise that either of you had to do to sort of make the pieces come together?
No, we're just absolutely barred when it comes to that. It's just about like we don't really feel. Both of us, fortunately, don't feel that much ownership over the work that we produce, which made the collaboration possible in the first place. It just happened organically. We didn't actually decide. Honestly, we just left pieces around, and then I was like, I'm going to finish this. Doing this fast enough. I like this. I'm just going to. And then we just once we were like, oh, we should just do that a lot of the time. Just why not just interfere with each other's process or overlap? Because as an artist, deciding when something is done is really difficult. And two people deciding when something's done is really difficult. When two people sort of crisscross and overlap and really work that way, it just sort of resolves itself. At least for us. I can't speak. That's not something I could generalize. I'm sure everyone works differently. But also, Emily's parents are collaborating with us. So
that's right.
You can't, apple doesn't fall far from the tree on her side maybe, but seeing two people collaborate, seeing what they could build, and where you fill in each other's gaps and the possibilities that creates was really inspiring to me. Watching, her parents, Chris and Lisa, they're had a long career, then they start out commercial, and so they've crossed every genre of what art is and how it enters the public, and you see that gives you an adaptability because two people are stronger than one, and some days you're feeling down, the other one can pick it up, or either way, so we just got each other's backs in that way. But
that's beautiful.
We didn't think about it though, really. We were just in love, and then it came naturally, and I'm a really overbearing person probably too, so I think there was probably no escaping my critiques. We might as well just form together and combine. Because I'm definitely I'm really hard on myself and my own work, and I'm definitely not any easier on other people necessarily, even if I admire it. So it just sort of happened, ruthlessly and lovingly.
That's an art love story. That's fantastic. All right, so how does the process work then? Is it kind of like what you said? You'll start one and she'll start one, then you kind of
like usually we're still pretty solitary. So we will when the pieces are big enough and we can be in different spaces. Like we'll be working at the same time. Like we have a triptych we're working on right now. And so we really work side by side on that because we have a whole wall. But we work in small spaces a lot too. So a lot of it's just like she'll like lay down something that she's probably not even happy about, or it's just like a couple lines or like a very like vague sketch, and I'll just like take that over, and like vice versa. And same with sculpture, since we make sculpture, it's the same thing. Like I'll see like, oh, I'm gonna fix that. But we're for some reason we're just open to that. I never would have saw myself as open to that, but like I said, with my health and stuff, and realizing like I couldn't do stuff on my own, which for me as someone who's really made me angry. I was like, I'm doing this. I always wanted to be perfect. So I was like, to me, I wanted to find a way to be with someone else and work with someone else that I felt was strengthening me, not me just leaning on them. So I was like, if I'm going to have like, a supervisor, because I'm going to like fall down or something, then I may as well really build that into something powerful, not just a vulnerability, because all power comes from some kind of vulnerability, I think, which we see more and more, which is good, especially in art. So
that's great. That's absolutely fantastic. I really love that for you guys. That's beautiful. Okay, so I want to talk about the art then, because I was going through Instagram and the website and stuff, and there's one thing, or a couple things that I noticed. Very figurative, right? Lots of bodies, and not too much color.
No.
Some are just plain black and white. There's some that have maybe like 2 or 3 different colors. My question is, what is it about figurative human body drawing or creating art, and also the color schemes?
Well, I mean, the color for me is, I guess I'll answer that first, but the color or absence of it for both of those, that color is very strong, I guess I would say. And that bringing in a color is not like, since we work, so like in terms of how we work, like we might sketch from life or like a photograph or something, but we don't really look at that in a prolonged way. We really keep changing, especially since she might look at someone, and draw them, but then I'm coming in, I'm just not looking at anything except what she put down, and it becomes something very different. So for me, because the color is not coming in sort of representationally, I'm not like, oh, little yellow up here. Not like Bob Ross in it, so it's like, honestly, a lot of times I just don't even consider it. And same with her. Like we both start in charcoal almost always, both because I think we always both agree that's like, I want to be able to like make whatever I can make like in dirt, like with like these brute materials, whether it's ash or something. And also creating with something that's made from destruction is poetic, even though we don't really think of it that way. It's just, but starting with charcoal and really enjoying the gradient of something in the gray scale you get from working in charcoal made me appreciate how much sort of life there is in those subtle shifts and forms of just a monochromatic scale. But like I said, color is very strong for me, and for her too. I know we have the same. It's very emotional. So color comes in almost structurally, and it almost comes in as if it's like really like from the outside, because we work so like we're very linearly driven in terms of like following a figure and just sort of like the way a space gets cut up. Because I know that for both of us, we don't really even think of ourselves as painting or drawing bodies or sculpting bodies or human figures. It's just a figure, and a figure is anything, and it ends up taking on a life of its own and becomes someone or something recognizable. But for us, whether we're working abstractly or figuratively, it's always kind of figural. It's not figurative, because what even is a figure ultimately, besides something that has some recognizability, something that at least seems like it could be read, or seems like we remember it or see it somewhere. So that's our starting point, is really just sort of just getting that cut of like that a body makes and being in a space, that like seam where it like extends from. And that's why, again, we don't necessarily bring in color, because it would de-emphasize, I think, for us, the way that just a simple mark creates, divides, and folds a space around the body. So
interesting. Yeah, because I mean, it absolutely works. And when you were talking about earlier, being out in the woods, and, what you don't see, the shadows, and I get a lot of that with a lot of your work. When you are creating, when you're coming up with ideas, is it concept first, or maybe you saw something that inspired you?
It's just always concept after. We can be very conceptual, even with like a curatorial work like we're sitting in right now. The concept I try to build and find in tandem with it actually being worked on or practiced, because otherwise it feels very contained by something. And I love writing, I love words and stuff, we'll have long titles and stuff a lot of the time. But that's all generated after the fact. I like to, especially since it's sort of like the chaos of two people working, I like to, after the fact, we sort of see that it's not that chaotic, that there is all these elements and that come through, and it can just be read. So I like to, we both kind of just like, any concept that comes from the work is sort of read or written at the same time or after it's made. It never comes before. I should say that for both of us, whenever we start with something it ends up being completely different.
Oh, I see.
By the end. So it doesn't really matter if we start with something, because I'm still going to have to reread it and rewrite it in terms of what it actually became.
Interesting.
So even if we like do that sometimes, it doesn't actually become what it was intended to be. So it's like, we're going to do this kind of painting. It's we're very process driven, and I think the concept is always there, or concepts. There's always something going on.
Sure.
But we both sort of gain that from our experience of the work, and that's because we get to experience it as someone else. When we finish a work, it doesn't really feel like mine, so it also gives us entry into that sort of encounter where it's like looking at someone else's work. I'll see like, I see what I did, but then I see it linked up with something else. So
interesting. Wow, that's fantastic. So do you and Emily still do solo work? You still work on things by yourself, or is it right now at this moment strictly the Objet AD?
Yeah, no, we just work entirely together. There's no separation. So we just, since we started working that way, we haven't considered, because it just folds in to each other's practice so much on either side. Even if it seems like we might be working on something individually, they always end up crossing over at some point. So it has stayed that way since we started.
And it works.
It just works. Otherwise, we just wouldn't continue. We're both very intense, so if it wasn't working, it wouldn't be working.
That's fantastic. Okay, I want to talk about so before you started, the collaborative work, were you showing your art by yourself before that?
No, I really wasn't interested in that. It was actually like just part of my writing process. So for all of my essays would start as a drawing or a painting.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
And like I said, and that was in graduate school that I was mostly doing. In undergraduate, my studio practice was like earth art, basically exclusively, for better or for worse. So
no pictures? No, did you?
I have some. I do have some documentation of that, but I don't really show it all the time. You know what I mean? I didn't really put it out there as much, but I do. It was a body of work that I enjoyed and really formed aspects of my practice, especially thinking of how to capture things like impermanence and time. Because for me, it's all of work is as much space as time, because we're not ever really experiencing those things separately.
That's true. Yeah.
And so time is, I think, difficult to mark or bring into a work, and that's something I look for both in my work and any other art that I enjoy. I'm always interested in how there's some sort of marking of the passage of time. So that's what I learned from that practice. But no, I didn't. I didn't see myself that way. I was very serious about. I did. My undergraduate was both studio art and philosophy and language and stuff, and then I moved more towards just like art history and the theoretical and philosophical and literary studies in graduate school. So the other art stuff, I was just busy, so I really didn't think that people would be interested in my work as circulating in that way. For me, it was sort of just an interstitial or in between thing, like it's part of my process of getting stuff out there. So
okay, that's very interesting. Okay. It was just sort of a means to I guess whatever you were working on at the time. So were you using these to sort of, not necessarily as inspiration for the essays that you're writing, but inspiration, or just sort of that's just kind of the process that you go about. That's just how you get things going.
Yeah, it just was sort of like if someone does like a word splash or something, that. But instead, I would, have like a figurative scene or something,
That's
So,
awesome.
and that's just, I guess, part of that's just how I tend to remember things too. So for me, if I want to like remember something I read, if I come up with like my own image of like what's going on,
cool,
I remember it a lot better, kind of like a silly childhood mnemonic or something. But I think it was just sort of like a reading and writing aid in a way. But beyond that, I always knew it was important because it's not like I didn't have an artistic practice.
Sure.
But I guess the impermanence is sort of what, or the temporality of the work and how it carries time and space and thought. And concept. That's all it was. It was just sort of like a vessel from like, so I'm writing an essay about like a book or a couple of books, and it just sort of takes me from that place of sort of pre-verbal or pre-writing, preliminary, literally in that sense, like before writing. That for me, that's something that art kind of offers, where I don't have to quite see the words yet, because words are strong in a different way than visual images or symbols even can be. So if I can sort of see what's percolating in my response before I sort of force words, which are more borrowed in my opinion too. I mean, all lines and all those markings are borrowed, and that's just how anatomy and evolution work at a certain point. But beyond that, it's just I want to start with something more primordial, more unformed, but still with form in it. So that was, I think that's all it was. But it wasn't that conscious. It was just something I'd done since I was younger, and I always honestly saw myself as being like a writer. But more than an artist. But I never really, just because I didn't really see that as like a viable option. I grew up in a family with, a nurse and a psychologist father. So I just,
That's interesting. I got this vision in my head of like cave art. And then eventually over time just evolving into, written language, and then sculptures and then drawing. It was just the starting off. That's maybe like the earliest, I guess, the earliest human-made art there ever was. That's because when you were talking about how you started with the drawing and then it evolves. That's awesome, man. That's a nice style of. I've never heard of anyone doing that before. That's pretty cool.
Well, I mean, and drawing too is interesting to me because it's really the most like drawing, writing, mark making. Those are some of the most like direct ways of making an artwork or writing or communicating at all or showing, demonstrating. All those things are linked at a certain point in a very important way. And I mean, it's interesting you say something like cave art too, because even thinking about like how I moved in my own genesis in my art, I started with like I said, like literally the earth, and like just like how does someone write things or make messages with what's just like not really going to be fully transformed. That's what I found interesting about earth art. How do I make a mark in something that's not really going to hold that mark? That can be seen momentarily, but ultimately returns to itself, and then more and more drawing, and now I paint more and more, but it's all drawing to me, especially both of our process, I should say, we barely use brushes. We use mostly our fingers and rags. So, and that's also like sort of a lot of the, mostly because neither of us like to clean brushes.
But but it lends to the artwork, you know what I mean? That's fantastic. My daughter, my youngest daughter, she's 10, and she's, she paints, draws, she's very artistic. And it's usually, the end of the night, and I'm, putting things away, and it's, could you please wash my brushes?
Exactly. No, it's a lot. No, we just avoid that problem. Use a completely dried, terrible brush. We don't really care. So we just like, we're all about sort of like letting whatever's in and around our space just sort of be used. And
that's awesome. But it's so funny too, because with your art educational background, you would think that would be much more, what's the word I'm looking for? The hyper realistic sort of.
Sure. Like something very trained and precise. That's just. I mean, for me, I would lose. I've always, I took like like, you know, I understand, like, you know, that I can follow that process. But for me, it's always a very diluted version of what I want to achieve, but only because time is so important. So sometimes I want something to happen very quickly because it needs to, or it's not going to be what it is. And so that's always the case with expression and expressionistic works, I think. But, you know, I don't categorize things that necessarily that way. I just like see it as a quality of the work. You know, it's definitely more expressionistic, just in the sense that I'm not taking the time to develop it to a representation. So that's I'm not that interested in representation in my writing. I'm not that interested in reference. If there's a reference, it's always sort of like a joke. Like in my work, like a lot of like art is also just like how to tell a good joke. So like a lot of my like works, especially the more drawn ones for us, are sort of like little jokes. Like, you know what I mean? Because we take it dead serious, but at the same time, you know, how serious can anything be taken? So, and just a joke is a great way of conveying information too, and telling a story. So that's
well, the art works. I absolutely love it. I mean, you guys are making fantastic stuff. So it's, you know, the process, everything that's working for you. I mean, I'm happy and looking forward to see what else you guys have in the future.
Thank you.
It's fantastic. Okay, now I want to talk about curating. I want to talk about the gallery a little bit. So was this the first gallery that you curated for, or did you have experience somewhere else?
Yeah, so I did more like consultancy and like sort of not like gallery public sort of stuff, more like behind, you know, closed doors dealing and just working with people. And so not putting on exhibitions, but just, you know, finding artists for people, finding works, putting together like, you know, a group of works or artists for folks in their homes, or, you know. So it was always, I was working more with just like art dealing before, which was an interesting entry into this because it's, you know, privately organized. But I always wanted other people besides someone with a lot of money and blank walls to see the art. I was like, this looks great, but you're not even going to take pictures and share this, you know. So it's not as gratifying in a way, but, you know, I didn't, you know, it was really helpful to just work also in a way where it's just about finding important work. And how that is always entangled with some kind of market. That's a very good training for, because it was important that I think that the market was a overbearing and very present force in that before coming into something like this, where I'm both paying attention to that, but in a way where I'm really directly trying to confront what the market is and what an economy is for art and artists. But it's like, it's just a matter of, in that space, I'm really forced to find stuff of value, but you know, I've never wanted to sort of sacrifice what I actually think is important. So I always, it has to be important, it has to be historically important, and it's often my job to tell those stories, to you know, hear what the artists have to say, to hear where it's coming from, and you know, that, to me, the history and the historical value of a work can come from something like listening to an artist. So that's what I learned, is that it's just about really being honest, and that honesty and transparency, even in a pretty brutal marketplace, can work, because the right people find the right work, and it gets situated in the right ways. So that's what art, we sort of taught me to go against the grain, because I'm not a good liar. So I realized I wasn't going to be one of those guys who can say this is the most fantastic thing I've ever seen if it's not. So I didn't go that route. And it showed me basically that I could do this, because otherwise I would have never believed that. And so it gave me the confidence to do this in a more public way, rather than just, you know, consulting for people and just saying, oh, I want this to go with this, or you know, but then wanting to make it, you know, something that everyone can see and it can be shared regardless of whether or not someone buys it. So,
absolutely, and no one will ever see it. Okay, so I have a question about that. That's very interesting. So when you're consulting, is it when you're, let's say a client wants something specific, right? Are you're reaching out to the artist, or just looking around for the right sort of artwork? Talk to the artist, hear their story. The people buying the art, do they really? This is a tough question to ask. Do they take those sorts of things in mind when they're buying an art piece? I mean, yes and no. So the people I like to work with, yes, absolutely. But there are, of course, there are folks who just want to know
the investment value, what it's going to make them, if it's a safe bet. But some people genuinely want that opportunity to find newer works that are like just gaining traction or haven't yet. It really depends. But for the most part, no, people tend to ask me, and then I just see their eyes glaze over. I'm like, you're not listening, are you? Like immediately. So people will be like, oh, and then they'll say like, oh, that's wonderful. But it really depends. Like, it's collectors are like anyone else. There's a real mixed bag in what people look for. But of course, the value is important for people moving around with big amounts of money or anything. And,
that's true.
But there's all scales of investors too, and that's also what our gallery is about, is that they're making art accessible in different ways and keeping it an open conversation for folks, and sort of showing how you can invest in small and really build a collection from nothing. You don't have to build it out of something with already established works. It's really up to people helping people and build something. So.
If you like something from an artist, they can have no one can know who they are at all.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, you're a good person to ask this in. Did you ever notice any, let's say, art trends? Maybe not in the artwork that artists were making, but what people were buying.
Yeah, I mean, in LA, a lot of the people I was working with initially were looking for pop art specifically. That has slowed down quite a bit, which is interesting. When I was first, probably like 5 years ago, I'd say it was still. But it really depends. There's it goes a lot with people's architectural styles and sort of like things like that, which also gave me insight into sort of the arbitrary or not random things that sort of dictate who buys what and for what reasons. You see that's a mixture of investment, of just taste, of just what looks good with whatever. But no, I mean, right now it's it's always abstract art of sort of all kinds, and that's always going to be the trend because it's the easiest to put somewhere. Because again, I wasn't doing stuff with museums and stuff. I was working with private collections and collectors, so a lot of it was still in a home. A lot of it just went to storage, which is always the other thing too. In terms of that kind of work, I mean, stuff that people buy that they're really excited about. I mean, figurative expressionist works are really, still very powerful and strong in the market, but mostly from already established artists. I mean, and that's the difference too. With private collectors and collections, you see very different trends than sort of the actual trends of what's being exhibited or practiced. And you also see the splits between public institutions and what they buy. And then, and it's really just, like I said, it's sort of arbitrary, but it also just makes perfect sense. It's for most private collectors, they just want stuff that looks nice and suits their space. But there's a lot of different people out there looking for different things, and a lot of people are well educated about the art they want to buy, and more and more we're seeing also what's really popular, which is both problematic I think but important, is the rise in black artists, both men and women black artists, and of course there's the risk of tokenizing those artists, and there's this scramble to find black artists and buy their work and show it, and that's a good trend. But you always have to ask, who's doing what and what were they doing 2 years ago before, and who did they vote for and all that. Not that matters, but I can't. That's
the truth.
There's someone in me that's always going to ask those questions, and that's important to do. So we try to sort of pay attention to trends, not as something to participate in, but just something to be aware of. Because we're not big hitters in terms of we're not selling Picassos, all this stuff. But we're a small gallery. We offer something critical and historically important, and we will always guarantee that the work that we show is well conceived, worked on very hard, by an artist who's found a position and place of expressing themselves uniquely in an honest way. And that has a value in a world full of dishonesty and copycats. We try to find people who are just simply not copycats, who are not just completely, doing the easiest thing. We want to find people who just sort of work to work. And that does sell because people see how unique that is. So it's important to go against the grain, because also in Los Angeles, there's seemingly infinite galleries. So no one, I'm not going to get far trying to be someone else, because there's already someone else like that out there. So I'm a pretty somber person. I take things seriously, and we just work very, the work of the gallery is conceptual, it's archival, and it's a matter of being housed and what that means to have a place and a space and a place where being unhoused and displacement is a massive problem. All of these questions are always going to be tangled into the place of the gallery, and we don't want to avoid those questions.
Yes, no, absolutely.
That's why we started out nomadic too. We had opportunities to be in different places with the gallery, but we wanted to be in a space. This has been a gallery for a long time. Many others passed through it. We didn't want to step into someone else's community and say, here's our community. That has nothing to do with you. Which is always a huge problem throughout all sorts of areas.
Oh, absolutely.
And that's just terribly depressing to me. So, and I can't look at the art when I go in there and I see, it's interesting that everyone outside the gallery is very different than everyone inside the gallery. So that's all. That inside and outside is something to pay attention to. It's not always someone's doing something wrong, but a lot of times they are. So
that's true.
We just try to be vigilant. You got to stay vigilant in a space like LA where everything's changing, everyone matters, and everyone has something different going on.
Absolutely.
How can you possibly make that work? You just got to stay vigilant. You got to talk to people. You got to ask people questions, and we just want to be an open resource and an open space, and
awesome.
Take the work seriously.
No, really, no, that's great. So, how do you go about finding an artist for this gallery? Is it do you accept submissions from artists? Do you just kind of go online or visit other galleries when shows happen and look for artists there?
We do a little bit of everything, really. Yeah, we accept submissions. We try to remain open to whoever, because who am I to say that I've seen everyone's work? And, there's a lot of stuff out there, and every artist has a different way of being able to actually get themselves out there. Not everyone can get to a gallery and talk to someone too. And not everyone can make a nice website. Not everyone, so it's really, we're open to whatever. And as long as, we might not accept, might not show your work, but I'm happy to look at it. And I always try to give people feedback when I can. And, that's important. That's part of our role, is to see people's work and respond to it and, say this is strong, that, that's why I try to give people a response, because that's what's missing too, especially from people who didn't get to go to art school or something, it's like I can at least offer them that relation, that response, some information. So we try not to be closed off in that way. So, but then otherwise, we look around. We don't have any friends, so the artists are not our friends. That's what we say. Like, that's the big difference. Most galleries are just showing their, and that's great, but I don't. That's not an option for me, and I wouldn't do it anyway, probably. But it's easy to say. In any case, it's like we really try to find people who are just important. I could care less about who the person is on a certain degree, unless that's important to their work, because it's also different. Some artists, their identity and who they are, they're always linked in some way, but a lot of times we find the work, and even if you're the most difficult person to deal with, it wouldn't matter if we really liked your work, and that's sort of what's missing too. So we try to do what's missing, and that's like focus on the work, focus on, I know that some people, it's important that their work gets out there, and the whole point of our work to me is that it definitely transcends, or at least goes beyond the reach of the artist at a certain point. So if the artist is a nightmare, that might be okay. Let's see what their work is doing. Their work might still be important. I'm not saying we should have preserved Hitler's paintings, but I'm just saying
not that far.
They weren't good enough, But we gotta, there's something that's important about just seeing the work, and so. We go to all sorts of shows and see people that way, but it's just a mixture. Like, I go online, Instagram's a good tool to a certain extent, but also I look for stuff that actually looks bad in photographs a lot of the time, or stuff that I can see is not, because to me the main problem that's out there, and then why I'm disappointed, is that things are often much more interesting in photographs than they are in person. And things like the rise in like acrylic paint and stuff is great, but it photographs really well and like vibrant colors. But then you see, so that's like a trend that you see where, like, especially with figurative work, these like highly sort of sectioned off, bright, colorful regions and figures. And there's a lot of great artists doing, but a lot of that to me is just driven by social media and photography. And people forget that photography is an incredibly important medium, and that we're basically, most people are almost only looking at art as a photograph, and that's its own work.
Oh, you're right.
So all those little in-betweens are important to because also it goes down to what an artist has. Oh, they don't have an amazing camera phone or something. I don't want that to be the reason why someone doesn't get something. So, but whether you're on the sidewalk somewhere in your, like it really just, I'm open. I know artists live all kinds of lives, just like anyone else. And they're just basically workers, not making much money most of the time. So I just try to pay attention, I think I just got to pay attention. And also people come in here. That's the power of a space like this. People come in here and we've met artists that way and, come talk to us and show us your work. And I do listen. I won't, that's the thing. It's like, it's it's not just lip service. I will listen.
I know that personally, guys. That's actually how we met. I came to this gallery for a show. It was about to close in like 20 minutes, and I walked in, and we just started talking, and now here we are.
Yeah, that's true. So just walk in, we just keep our eyes open. It's really been every possible way of finding an artist, even if it's through another artist. They always say like most galleries find artists through other artists too, because artists often have the best idea of other stuff that's out there too. But the internet's a powerful tool.
It really is.
But like I said, you have to be careful too, or we try to be careful in terms of like, finding the stuff that might not present itself that way in that format, and seeing what's beyond there. Because often it's amazing what something is doing not in a photograph.
So, you're right. You just got to check it out. Okay, then, all right, I've got to get off the gallery for a second because I really want to ask you this. How do you feel about AI art sort of, I mean, it's not perfect yet, right? We used to do sort of computer-generated images. But how do you feel about, let's say there was a couple people who entered actual art contests and submitted an AI-generated thing as, as their own. I think there's room for it. There's functionality in AI art, but I have a problem with people saying I'm an artist, and I just kind of type a few prompts in, and the computer did everything.
Yeah.
How do you feel about that kind of entering, the traditional artist space?
I love it because I think any competition or any challenge to what's already been established is good. It's never going to achieve whatever people think it's going to achieve. If history teaches us anything, it's like whatever the initial idea of what something is going to do is probably not going to happen. But I mean, it's interesting. It raises a challenge, but just like they say with like the chat GPT thing and like gives, Professor no, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I could have sussed that stuff out in like 2 seconds. It's pretty obvious because it just requires knowing. For me, everything's about having two examples. So you have one that's like AI, one that's not. It's like anything can be, you just need to, with any amount of comparison, you're always going to be able to see some kind of difference. And that, so far with AI, there's always something notably AI about it, which is great. That's just like, so that let people make AI art, and it's just going to be a medium or technique. And, there's interesting ways to bring it into a practice or like think about it. But, it's a fad, and those things can become really powerful and stay powerful, or it might, dwindle out. It's going to be important because it's a tool. So right now we're seeing sort of a fantastical, all these like more like humanoid ideas of what it's going to become. But obviously something like AI would just be really powerful as a tool for artists or for anyone in all sorts of ways. Just automating processes would save people lots of time. So of course that will become its main use across everything. It can just automate a lot of our annoying things that we do, which is a goal, I guess. It's not the worst sounding. So. But we got to be careful because about who is an AI artist? Is it someone who has a really bad computer? Probably not. So maybe, but like that's always my thing. Is like I'm still always like that's like so like start with charcoal. Like show me start with just like dirt or ash or something like So for me, like an artist is like you might make AI art, but unless you're gonna show me what you can do with a pile of dirt or something like that, then I'm not that interested. If you rely on that entirely, I don't know that I buy it.
So that's my issue. Like I know some artists who use it like for references to just kind of they have an idea, they want to kind of see different things. But yeah, it was one particular incident that just really like it got me extremely heated. Right, there was an artist. Well, it was an AI artist, right, on Twitter, who put up some AI generated art, and immediately someone says, "Oh, I forget the artist, but they said that looks like this notable artist's work." And not even a super famous artist, a guy that's famous on Twitter, actually.
Yeah.
Our Twitter is pretty cool, right? So people that are aware of him just came immediately and were like, "This looks like, what did you type to prompt this?"
Yeah.
And they were just showing comparisons of this actual artist's work and the AI prompt, and it obviously was inspired by this guy. Right?
Yeah.
And so, oh my gosh, yeah. So it was really, that's what really drives me insane. It's a lot of these engines are trained off of, it's just images from the internet, right? So
yeah, exactly.
Any artist that's got art online, like it's, Mid-Journey, things like that, they're looking at all of that stuff. They're incorporating all of that into their data sets. But yeah, I'm not sure, like you said, it's, it's a tool.
Yeah.
But to say you are an artist and that's all you do is, yeah.
No, I mean, you're a computer scientist, maybe.
Yeah.
Like a coder. I mean, I don't know, but I mean, what an artist is, I mean, even that term, I always think comes after the fact, and it's more, almost has nothing to do with the person making the art, which is the whole thing too. It's like, that's why we're sort of like Marxists in that way, where there's workers, and there, that's what we're the closest thing to a Marxist gallery you're going to get.
Yeah.
A worker state.
I like that.
But with AI, but you bring up a good point. It's about, I guess, is the problem with the repetition of the same. If it's only being fed what's already out there, it's never going to come up with anything new. The technique is new, but what it's producing is actually incredibly passé most of the time. Or when it is new, it's like a really nice screensaver.
Yeah.
So, which is great, but like that's the risk of it. It's like with any computer, the whole thing with computer knowledge, all that, what's computable and what's not. It's great, and it achieves things that's effective, but it has no way of accounting for itself. It doesn't get its own act back in the system. It can't see where it's making an error in the way that a human can make an error and continue to make that error, because art is all about errors.
Oh, yeah.
The error is often what makes a work of art powerful. Yeah. So if something like AI it can distort things, but it's not making those errors that is the mark of a body that actually really leaves this kind of imprint of time and work that is powerful for people seeing stuff, because it's not entirely under control, even though it's surrounded by sort of controlled acts. So that's the risk, if you want to repeat more of the same, it's never going to be avant-garde. Even if I think people rush, you see that with all sorts of material, not just AI, but like you see people rushing to use all sorts of what's the next weird material. And that race to the weird to me is risky, because to me nothing's that weird. Nothing's that strange. So like whatever you think that is this new material or new this, or just based on newness or weirdness, is never going to be as new or strange as you think. Someone's probably already done it. And it's probably just not that weird. I don't know. That's just me. I'm not as weirded out as I should be by the stuff, and I see that happening more and more.
That's very true.
And that's sort of like one of the other trends, I guess, is it's like this race to weirdness, and also like there's like a cutesiness aesthetic that's also become somewhat popular, especially with like sort of more curatorial group shows where it's like, these personal artifacts, and that's all great, but there's when you're speaking to someone else, you're speaking to someone else. So it's that point of contact that I want to see the most, not just someone's individual race to do something weird or, this is like, something personal no one will understand. So that's great, but what are you going to do to open that up? That's the challenge, is that to bring the personal to a level where it can actually be read by someone else and you don't have to step in and dictate what that is. So,
I like that. I like the way you put that. Do you think that popular culture today, because popular culture when I was a kid, right? It was whatever you saw on TV, maybe a magazine, movie, music, like that was it. Right? That's all you saw. But now we have so much access to everything and everyone that whatever is sort of trendy at the time, instead of it just being trendy like in your city or in your state, now it's trending around the world. So do you think that sort of kind of microwave, here today, gone tomorrow, trends the things that happen all the time, right?
Yeah.
If you think of any kind of trend from a year ago, it's not even around anymore. Do you think that's a good influence on artists, especially young artists who are, I would say, probably more influenced because, the youth, they're on it's social media everywhere. Everyone's on their phone. It's right in your face. You kind of can't get away from it.
Yeah.
Do you think that is maybe a good or a bad thing for a young artist?
It depends, because it's so dependent on their practice too. Because if someone's going to depend a lot or look towards popular culture and reference that kind of movement in their work, it means that they're going to have to show that work pretty quickly.
Yeah.
So that's also the power of showing stuff on social media.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a question of what kind of time someone's working with. I think any time scale can be powerful.
Sure.
But it just brings in the question of how something's shown. There's things that can be shown at any point in time and never lose sort of like the gravity and referentiality and friction that they have with the world. And there's things that, you place it in a different context and it looks very different. But that might work. And that's also this only time will tell sometimes which of those. Basically, I think with that kind of work, there's always powerful statements that are made, even if it's locked into a pretty specific, popular culture reference. But only time will tell, and it will sift out sort of and that's just sort of the accidents of time, which is, I would say that's always the risk of working with something so momentary or fleeting like that, is that you're really going to be locked into chance. Yeah. And you always are as an artist, so I can admire people doing that, but it just, as someone who's also curating, it raises important questions about when something's shown and how important that is in reference to work, because that's tricky. If something really needs to be shown right now, that's going to be a big part of how that artist works and gets their work out. But in general, I like works that sort of extend through all channels of time. There's something marking the local and momentary characteristic of it, but there's also something reaching back, and not something too referential necessarily. I'm not looking for these deeply thought out connections. I'm just saying I want something that's both narrow and wide. I want all those paradoxes of something in an artwork. That's what's interesting or powerful for me. That it can be opposite things at the same time. It can be old and new. That it can be now and then. It can be all these in multiple places at the same time. So it's definitely a risk to lock it into a moment, but it definitely works sometimes. It definitely does. So
you're right. Awesome. Okay. How would you describe the state of? I guess I'll just keep it. Maybe not local. Well, I guess local, and then more broadly, the state of art right now. I feel like. All right, so I've been going to museums, galleries since I was a kid, right? My dad, the artist, just about every weekend, probably at the LACMA, or we're one of the museums down there. So I've kind of seen sort of an evolution on even how galleries put on shows. You know what I mean? It's some of it. It's got the same kind of core, it's very nice. Maybe there's a little bit of music. There's some drinks here, but I think things are evolving with a new generation of artists. I think they're a lot more willing to help each other out. A lot more community-based than, let's say, artists from maybe 20, 30 years ago. Hold on, geez, now I lost my train of thought going off. What was my point? Oh yes, what do you think that art is in a good space right now? With social media really changed the game. People can share their art, and hopefully people see it. So do you think that has added to the change, or if you even see a change at all with how artists are being represented, how art is presented, in public spaces, or just in the zeitgeist in general?
Well, there's definitely, first of all, museums are in a crisis. So a lot of the community stuff, that's just touching the museum level at certain times, but museums are in a certain crisis, and we'll see this over and over lately with them swapping out different curators, especially trying to get different identity polls for people, and often tokenized. A lot of people have gotten positions and left because they feel tokenized and they're given no real power, so they're just become a figurehead, and then they're still not really allowed to develop it. And at museums, and so there's a lot of that going on where the museum is trying to adjust its very colonial, very imperial, very racist, very problematic past that usually has, everything's stolen, and you usually killed those people and pried it from their hands. So, I mean, and even with museums that are newer, there's still the institutionality of it, and the placement of them. You have like stuff like, I remember I forget the artist, he does this, but at the Hammer Museum, they had like the installation with all like the tents inside of like the homeless encampment. It's like, but outside you have that, and you're like a very expensive establishment. And like, so it's always a matter of like, museums are struggling because they have to read their audience. They're trying to comment on the contemporary scene, but there's such a part of the problem, I think, that's actually, it's a good time. So crises are always really important for art, and often when the best art is made and when the best questions are raised. So for me, it's like a really powerful and important time. And that's also why we wanted to create this gallery, because we want to be going against the grain, asking important questions, making a self-reflexive and conscious space, and just, getting clear on certain questions about what a gallery does, what it is. And a lot of galleries are doing that. So you see a lot of variety in Los Angeles. Like you said, a lot of spaces are more community focused. And there's always community in art, but we're not community focused in that way, in the sense that people say it, because it's a lie. So I'll tell you why. Because most of the time people say community, and to me, community is like your neighbors and stuff. Like, like where I grew up, was like, we didn't like our neighbors, but we saw them every day. We invited them to like family parties and stuff. I don't think we ever got along, but they're a big part of our life. That's community. It's not people I like. It's not my friends. It's people I have to be around. It's people, and so that's like the community that I think is missing. Because a lot of times people say community, but they just mean people that they know. So if art becomes reduced to not a work, but someone that makes something, it just might get pretty boring. Because, like I said, most artists that were really influential were very difficult people to be around, and were not necessarily, part of their work is their inability to be part of a community. So it's ultimately a little strange to me. And I guess that's my own experience with like my health issues and like being limited in what I can and cannot do. And I've had lots of times in like hospitals and stuff like that, and just like just like the basics of space are really important. Not just like, oh, I like people and I want to show their stuff, but just like, what is it to be in a space? What is it to get into a space? What is it to see something in a space? We just want to ask the most basic questions that still aren't really answered, and to come up with a key idea of what a gallery is and what it is to bring in strangers. We want a community of strangers. We want people that we don't know.
I like that.
Because again, like, who am I to say that the people I know deserve to be seen? It's like, that's just a different kind of investment that sounds to me just like, capitalism carried out elsewhere, because that's how all business works. So to act like that's some groundbreaking thing, which it can be. There can be times where like community, and this all comes from like relational aesthetics and that transformation, which is really important. The idea that the relation is the work of art is something I definitely agree with. It's very important. I see that that's where that community building aspect is coming from. But that needs to be, for us, taken really seriously, just in terms of like the space of the gallery in itself, not even the people yet. Maybe we'll get there, but for us, we're starting with the space itself, just the place itself, and what is that as a form of relation, and that's the starting point. But it's really, like I said, museums are in crises. The community aspect has become really important. Then you always have galleries that are just very commercially oriented, and that's just always, there's basically I see a 1,000 tiny worlds, today. There's a lot of bubbles, some overlap, and then there's always a circulation at the top of what's already out there and happening. So, there's still like a pyramid kind of shape to it, but there's a lot of fracturing off, and it's becoming more lateralized, which is good. And like, that's what these community building sort of like ideas of art do. They stretch the space a bit, and that's good. But we do have to be careful with just saying community and only having people we like be a part of it, because that's the challenge in the world today, where no one really likes each other, as far as I can tell. How do you work with someone you don't like? How do you show someone's art that's important, even if they as a person are not even really able to carry out that task for themselves? Because a lot of it is just artists are doing a lot of the legwork too.
Yeah,
So,
that's true. That's true.
Yeah, we want the gallery to pick up some of the slack. So we work very hard with the artists. We try to take care of the things that some galleries don't take care of, and make it happen.
Okay. So. What do you think sets you guys in this gallery apart from, let's say, one of the I don't want to figure gallery out in general, but a gallery, like you said, that the community is their friends and other artists that they know. What sets you guys apart?
Well, like I said, maybe we're just biased because we don't have friends. So it wasn't an option. Maybe I'm just hating because it's like something that we don't or can't do. But no, in any case, I mean, the difference is that we just take the work itself as seriously as possible. It is the work. Like it's not. We don't have to like you. Yeah. We have to think that your work is important. I don't even like that. That's the thing. It's like it's about showing stuff, about communicating something to a public, even if it's only a handful of people at a time sometimes. But it's about really having things be seen and heard, touched, navigated, encountered in some way, endured. We just want to position things that need to be seen, and it's really just about the work. It's not going to be about the artist or their identity, which is a struggle. We always want to keep in mind who we're showing and how that's done, but we're never gonna, we're never going to just say we're going to choose this person because we need to, because we're fulfilling a quota or which is sadly how a lot of things. I learned that from the university too, and these are the lessons I learned that I don't want to repeat. We're not filling quotas. I want to do the real work, the work that a university doesn't do, the work that most institutions don't do. As a small, there's a lot of suffering as a small gallery, but there's also a lot of liberty in that we can really set up our own idea of how we're working. And like I said, that's just about really starting with the material of the gallery, questioning that, even if people have no idea what we're up to initially. That's not important. They will see. And we always present things in such a way where it's like, if someone takes the time, they can engage it on their own terms and find something about, something to engage with. That's really, it's not about getting it all. It's not about totalizing ideas. It's about just creating the possibility of an encounter. And something as simple as that is hard. It's hard to do. It's hard to not let all these other forces come in, like these ideas about community and who you're showing and why, and if it's going to sell. We do the hard work of finding what's important and reiterating that point. We're not taking stuff that is unimportant and then overlaying our words or ideas or putting it in our space and say, this is goodbye. No, we're just finding stuff that's important and amplifying it. And that's it. That's it. It is, the simplest acts are the hardest to carry out 100% of the time.
Really?
So that's just getting something from point A to point B in a way that's honest and transparent. And real is difficult. So that's all. It's just the work. We just want strong work, and then we work alongside that work.
And it all comes together. We're helping each other out. That's true. Have you ever had a difficult artist whose work you just wanted to show, but it was, making your hair fall out the entire process?
I mean, not yet. I'm sure that can, but I mean, like I said, I'm open. I'm a pretty difficult person in my own life sometimes, so I'm pretty open to people being. I think anyone can be worked with when you give them the respect and time of day that they need. So so far, I mean, we have knock on wood or whatever, but but I'm open to that. That's the thing. It's like that's the challenge of it is the challenge of it. It's not something to be avoided. So
that's true. If the work is important.
So that's all. It hasn't happened. All the artists we worked with have been really awesome people to work with.
That's great.
Really supportive and when possible, the artist is a big part of how we do stuff too. It's not an artist-run collective in that way where like someone's putting it, but we really want to listen to the artist to some extent. If we ultimately we need to make decisions too, but it's really about working with the artists because we understand even putting together the show is still part of them making the work. So
when you're putting a show together, when you've got an artist picked out already, you've maybe gone to the studio, you've seen their work. How do you go about presenting it? I mean, narrowing down the pieces that you're going to use for the show and just getting it to fit properly in the space. How is that process? And is that usually a long process?
It usually is a pretty long process because it takes a a couple months usually to sort of like decide and go back and forth with the artist, see what's available, what looks good with the other works, what makes sense for the space. But it really just begins with a drawing, like we have up there. So that's sort of why, we just have, we just sort of measure stuff. It's very, we get an idea of what's important, or sometimes the artist has a body of work that already is together. It needs to be shown that way, which is helpful, but we also have to still make it work in the space. So it's really just a matter of, just a pretty long back and forth with the artist and figuring out what's important for them, what's important for us, and
coming together and getting all the right pieces. Okay, all right, that's awesome. All right, I don't want to take I could keep talking for another hour, right? But I don't want to take up too much of your time. But we could absolutely do this again another day. But I like to end with the same question. I do with all my interviews. If there was, let me rephrase that. If you could give advice to an up-and-coming artist, or an artist who's really just starting to get things going, any advice that you would give them? And also, was there some advice that you wish you had when you were, coming up?
It's hard to say because everyone seems to arrive in their own way. So I guess I would just say, don't think too much about, don't try too hard to just get yourself out there. Just work on the work. Just focus on the work. A lot of artists will spend do all the Instagram, focus all of their time on getting their stuff out. And that can be one way of doing it, but if you find that really going against you, or if it's not some people, the people who do well that way, that tends to come naturally to them. So if that's really not your thing, just make the work. It will, if you take your work seriously, it will take time. Being an artist takes time. You can't be entitled as an artist, unfortunately. It's going to be, it's going to be rough. There's a lot of chance involved, and you just have to focus on the work. That's really the key, is focus on the work, and let that define what's happening, because ultimately that will serve you best, because there's a lot of mistakes that can be made in sort of over getting your work out there, so scarcity is part of the economy with art too. So you don't want to be too out there. You want to have sort of a reserve about what's out there. But I would just say everyone has their own way too. That's what's awesome about it. I see every kind of artist. There's artists who make all sorts of merch and stuff too. And that's a great way. And that some people say, oh, don't do stuff like that at you. But you can really go any direction. So that's what I'd say. Just stay true to yourself, which is corny as can be.
It's the truth,
but with art, it's really true. It's really, as soon as you start lying, people lose interest. So that's my advice. Don't lie to yourself.
Absolutely.
Don't lie to other people. There's an honest way of working in you somewhere, and just do that. Don't try to be like someone else. If you find an influence, that's great. Mark it, but move forward. Don't copy. If you find yourself looking like a lot of stuff that's out there, see what else you can do to something. Do something, and then do something else to it. And be fearless. You have to sort of go at it.
Absolutely. All right, great words of advice. Zach Baker, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Reisig, I said it wrong again. Reisig and Taylor Gallery here in Los Angeles. When's the next show?
May 20th.
May 20th.
May 20th. Saturday, May 20th.
All right. I will absolutely be here.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much, man.
Thank you.
All right. See you guys.